minutes. Minutes. Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on this rainy / kind of snowy afternoon. My name is Veronica, and I am the Outreach and Events Liaison here at Idea Exchange. We are so excited that you are able to join us for an afternoon with best-selling author Lawrence Hill. Before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping items to go over. First, there was going to be a short Q&A session at the end of the talk. So if you have a question, you can either, if you're watching from Zoom, you can put it in the chat room or you can put it in the Q&A. If you're watching from YouTube, just put it in the chat room and I will bring the question over to Zoom. We are probably going to get lots and lots of questions, so we probably won't be able to get to everybody's, but we're going to try our best to get to as many as we can. Now, if you are interested in purchasing a copy of Beatrice and Croc Harry, Wordsworth Books is our official bookseller for this event. I will put their information in the chat room on Zoom. We also have lots and lots of copies at our library, so you can head on over to our catalog and you can reserve a copy there as well. Without further ado, I would love to welcome Colleen James, who is going to be the host for this afternoon's event. Colleen is the founder and principal consultant of Defonify Inc. So welcome, Colleen.
Let me unmute myself. Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. Looks like we're going to have a great discussion with Mr. Lawrence Hill. I am completely honored to introduce him and speak with him today in conversation. So a little bit about Lawrence Hill for those who do not know. He is the award-winning and internationally best-selling author of 10 books of fiction and nonfiction, including the Book of Negroes, which was made into a 6-part miniseries, The Illegal, both of which won CBC Canada Reads. He has previous novels, Some Great Thing, and Any Known Blood have also become bestsellers. His nonfiction work includes Blood, the Stuff of Life, and a memoir, Blackberry Sweet Juice. In June of 2022, HarperCollins Canada published Hill's 11th book, the novel Beatrice and Croc Harry, which is why we are here today. He has volunteers on so many different committees, the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, Book Club for Inmates, the Ontario Black Heritage Society. He's also done work in Kitchener's Grand Valley Institute for Women, with women who are incarcerated. Hill's currently writing screenplays for a TV miniseries in development and another new novel about the thousands of African-American soldiers who traveled from military bases in the Deep South to help build the Alaska Highway in northern British Columbia and Yukon during World War II. Some interesting Black history there in light of Black History Month. He's also a member of the Order of Canada. And in doing some research for today and prep, he was recently nominated. And when I mean recent, February 15th, he was nominated for a 2022 Canadian Screen Award in the category of Best Writing Web Program or Series for Sensitivity. So it is an honor to welcome and speak with you today, Mr. Hill. Looking forward to this conversation, and congratulations on that recent nomination.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And by the way, nobody calls me Mr. Hill. Larry will be just fine.
Okay,
thank you.
Larry. All right. So let's get started. We've got a little bit of time here today. So without giving any spoilers, could you tell us a little bit about Beatrice and Croc Harry, and what is this book about?
Sure. Thank you so much, Colleen. So Beatrice and Croc Harry is a novel. It just came out in January with HarperCollins Canada. It's 375 pages, hopefully happy, energetic, joyous pages. And it's about a girl named Beatrice who wakes up alone in a huge forest. She has no memory. Her memory has been completely erased, and she's been kicked out of human civilization. She doesn't know why, but there are no other human beings around. She's been abandoned in this forest. She's not going to starve to death because she wakes up in a treehouse and there's food and books in the treehouse, which is a good thing. And if I were stuck alone in a huge forest for a long time, I'd be happy to have some books and food as well. And her job in this novel is to figure out who she is. Her memory's erased. She doesn't even know her last name. She doesn't know if she has a country, a family, a mother, a father. She doesn't even recognize initially that she's Black, as there are no other people in the forest. And she's thinking about other things like, how am I going to cook oatmeal, and how am I going to not get killed by this crocodile? So she has a few other things on her mind initially when she wakes up. And this is a story about her journey, her attempt to find her way back to the world that she's been kicked out of, and her attempt to sort of embrace in a happy way her identity, to understand who she is and to love who she is. And she has to befriend some animals, on the way along this journey, namely a 700-pound, 69-tooth crocodile named Harry, a fast-talking crocodile who wants to have her for breakfast, but also kind of likes her.
Excellent. I will say my daughter and I are currently reading the book as well, and going through it, and that notion that she's completely unaware of where she is. And the book is very descriptive, which is excellent. You go into great detail just to describe the surroundings, where she is, and all of that, and coming to realize she has no memory. Another question for you. And I think this is one that many have, is you usually write adult books. What made you want to write a children's book this time around?
Well, my mother had died, and my sister had also died in an accident. And I was really sad, and I was grieving the loss of my mother and my sister. And I was having trouble writing the books I normally write because I think I was just sad, so sad. And so I was looking for something to do that I could write that was ready to come out of my heart. And I was stuck with the book I was working on before. So I thought, well, I'll just put that book aside and see what I've got in my heart. What am I ready to write? And so I went back to a bedtime story that I used to tell my own daughter, Beatrice, when she was a child. And when Beatrice was very young, this being my daughter, Beatrice, when she was 3, 4, 5, 7 years old, every night before she go to sleep, I tell her a story about a girl who almost gets devoured by a crocodile. And every night she narrowly escapes the jaws of death and gets to live another day. And Beatrice just loved these stories and made me promise that one day I'd turn them into a novel and honor her by naming the book after her. And I said I would, but it's taken me 15 years to do it because I had to write a few other books first. But finally, this book was ready to come out. And I guess I wanted to be happy, playful, joyous, even though I was exploring difficult and painful ideas. And so I think I wrote the book to comfort myself and to bring myself out of my own grief and to sort of remember the joy of being in a family when I was a child, and also being in a family when my children were young, and what it feels like to tell stories, around the bedtime.
Yes. There's something about children's books that are just so genuine, authentic, and takes us back into that, our earliest memories, right? They never get old. So you mentioned a little bit about where the idea from the book came from and your why behind it. How long did it take you to write 300 pages?
It was actually pretty fast, 375 pages. Yeah, I don't want any of those pages to be forgotten. They were a lot of work. It took 6 months to write the first draft, and then it took about a year and a half to write another 10 or 12 drafts to fix it up. And a draft, of course, is when you rewrite a book to fix it. And, writing is like trying to get the Olympics, as a basketball player, or trying to stand on stage and play the violin in front of 5,000 people. You're not going to get there unless you practice over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so if you just write something, well, it's not going to be very good, frankly, unless you're a genius. And I'm not a genius. It's not going to be very good first time out. So you have to rewrite your material to become a professional writer and to publish books. And so 6 months to write the first draft, and then about 18 months or a year and a half to write about 10 more drafts, until finally my editor was happy, I was happy, and we were ready to publish it. So about 2 years.
Okay. So for some of our young audience that is watching today, and they say, I want to be a writer, what is the one tip you would give them? 1 or 2 tips?
Well, if you want to be a writer, I think you should have fun. Even if it's a sad story, try to have fun writing it and try to feel that you're connecting with something that you really care about, whatever it is, whether it's sad, funny, playful, serious. If you don't care about the story that you're writing, believe me, nobody else will. So the first thing to do is to write something that matters to you, whether it's invented or true. A happy made-up lie to entertain people in the way of a story of work of fiction, or whether it's a true story about your own life. You decide. But be interested in what you're writing about and spend some time with it. And be comfortable in your own imagination. Turn off the TV. Turn off your cell phone. Close your door if you can, if you're able to close your door, and get comfortable with your own thoughts. Because writers and screenwriters as well, I'm both, and people who write long essays, which I do as well, we need time alone to be in our own thoughts and to enjoy our own thoughts and to live with them and see what we can turn them into. And so that would be another piece of advice. Get comfortable being by yourself and enjoying your own thoughts and loving your thoughts, and also remembering whatever ideas you have, they're great. Your life is an important life. And your life is worth exploring. And if you have some thoughts or some stories inside you, they're just as good as anybody else's. We all have stories inside our hearts. And so you have to believe that whatever story you want to tell is important and worth telling. And somebody else will be interested in hearing it if you tell it well. And so you have to believe in yourself and be prepared to be alone and write about something that matters to you. If it doesn't matter to you, it won't matter to anybody else.
Excellent. And maybe, I guess, you don't have to do it all in one sitting, right? It's okay to step away and come back to it again.
Yeah, well, it depends, of course, on what you're writing. Let's say it's a poem, and the poem has 5 lines, or even a story that's just 1 page long. Maybe you'll be able to write the first draft of that poem or that story in 1 sitting, maybe, or maybe not. But whether it takes you an hour or a day or 5 days to write that first draft, that first attempt at your poem or your story, you are going to have to come back to it if you're serious about making it better. Just like, if you're preparing to dance in the National Ballet of Canada and get on stage and dance in the Nutcracker, well, you're not going to do that without practicing over and over and over again. You're not just going to walk on stage and dance without practicing your routine like 10,000 times. Well, writing's like that too. You have to practice.
Excellent. One of the questions that always comes up, and I think, thinking about, I guess, your past, what made you want to become a writer?
What made me want to become a writer? Well, I can tell you one thing. My parents sure didn't want me to become a writer. My father was an African-American man, a Black immigrant from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a PhD, in sociology from the University of Toronto. And it was very important to him that his children become educated and become professionals. And because he was an immigrant from another country, and because he fled troubles in his own country, he wanted his children to avoid some of the terrible problems that he faced growing up, including his time, in the army in the Second World War for the American Army. And so he wanted us to become doctors or lawyers or engineers, and that was it. There was no debating. He had it decided for us. But I didn't want to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. I wanted to write. That was my thing. And a lot of parents don't want their kids to become artists. They want their kids to choose a safe route with a job that pays good money. And I think one of the first challenges to actually become an artist, frankly, is to set aside politely and respectfully what your parents are telling you and to pursue your life with your own passion and values. And just because somebody else says, be a doctor, that doesn't mean that you have to do that. Maybe that's not really what you're dying to do with your life. Maybe you want to dance. Maybe you want to paint. Maybe you want to sing. Maybe you want to write books, as I do. So my father made me write letters for the things I wanted, and I think that turned me into a writer, even though he didn't want me to become one. I wanted a kitten, and I was 6, and I said, Dad, can I have a kitten? No, you can't. And I asked again, no, Larry, you can't have a kitten, go away. And the third time I asked, he said, Larry, if you really want that kitten, go upstairs to your room and write me a letter and tell me why you deserve to have that cat and whose allowance will pay for its cat food and how you'll stop it from having babies in the closet. And if you can write me a good letter, maybe I'll give you that cat. And I just I was 6 years old. I could only write in cursive, in block letters. And I just poured my heart out in this letter about why I deserve to have this cat named Smokey, very original name. And he gave me the cat. And from that point on, every time I wanted something else, I wrote another letter. First pair of jeans, first pair of Adidas ROM running shoes, permission to stay out later. I was playing on the street with my friends. Whenever I wanted something and he didn't want to give it to me, I read a letter. And then he'd usually give it to me. And that turned me into a writer because I realized the power of language and the power of words. And if I just wrote well, I could persuade somebody about what I wanted.
Yes, the power of writing. And I think you raise a valid point about, stigma around what is a professional career path. I often, with some of the students that I teach, they say, this is what my parents want me to do, but this is what I want to do, right? And following that, I think we have a couple questions. I will stop now and turn it over to the audience. Okay, so I knew a question would come up about the Book of Negroes. And so I'm going to read this. The Book of Negroes was an overwhelming success. How is the reception of your new book in contrast to the legacy of the Book of Negroes? Do you think in some respects you were typecast and people are surprised by Beatrice and Croc Harry?
Are people surprised by Beatrice and Croc Harry, which is a novel for children, and it doesn't all look like or feel like or sound like or read like the sorts of books I've written before? Well, maybe a bit surprised to see that I wrote a book for children, but the sorts of themes that I approach in this book are very similar to the issues that I'm interested in my adult novels too. And it's kind of like being a painter. If you spent 20 years being a painter, there are certain themes and images that fascinate you, and you keep coming back to them. You explore them in different ways, but you find your way through your passion by going back to the same things over and over again. And writers do that too. There might be 3 or 4 or 10 things that really interest us profoundly in life, and we keep coming back to them. And each book for me is like a contribution to a mural, and the mural is the whole entirety of my work of art. And so the issues inside Beatrice and Croc Harry, the loss of identity, learning to feel good about yourself as a Black person, looking for home and looking for belonging, creating community, opposing injustice. These are issues that crop up in all of my other books. I guess the surprise, if a person wishes to be surprised, is that I wrote for children. But the fact of the matter is that, if you're an artist and a writer, it's hard to survive. It's hard to make money. It's hard to feed your family. And often you have to do 10 different sorts of things. You don't just do one thing, or you wouldn't you wouldn't have enough money, and also you wouldn't be stimulated. You wouldn't be excited artistically. So I've written films and a play and novels and short stories. And don't ask me to write poetry. I'm a terrible poet. But I've written speeches and journalism, but mostly novels are the thing I love. And I don't think a person who knows my work would be surprised by the themes, but they might be surprised that I chose to write a novel for children. But it was fun and exciting, and I'm really glad I did it. And, I took it very seriously. I wanted the writing to be at the top of my ability. I wanted the writing to be beautiful and to be meaningful and to speak to any reader of any age. It was very important to me to give my very best to this book. And so I took it very seriously and worked very hard on it. As I say, 12 drafts over 2 years.
Yeah. And even in the reading that I have done, that sense of identity comes through right from the beginning, right? And I think with young adults in particular and youth, they're constantly questioning their identity. So yes, there are themes and nuances that are directly related to your adult books. Okay. So, here's another question. Did your daughter Beatrice read a draft? And if so, did she have any comments for you? Is she contribute in any way to this book as well through the process?
Well, I don't think I would have ever written it if I hadn't been telling those bedtime stories to Beatrice when she was a child. So, their stories are mine. I invented them, even when she was a child. But our relationship is what led me to create those stories. So I'm very grateful to her. And she came into my life when she was 3 years old. And I wanted very much to bond with this new child in my life and to be a really good father to her. And it takes extra work and attention when a child comes into your life when they're already, several years old, and you want to create a bond. And I took that really seriously. So bedtime stories were a good way for us to connect and to learn to love each other. And so she didn't write the book or anything. I mean, it's my book, but she read it and encouraged me and made some good comments. So she was very much supportive. And all of my other children, I have 4 other ones who are older, they also read drafts of the book and encouraged me and made comments and made suggestions for improvement, that kind of thing.
Good. And it'll probably be really authentic with the comments too, right?
Yes. Dad, this stinks. You can do better than that.
A question from a student. Was it hard to get your first book published? What was that process like?
I thought the hardest thing I would ever do would be to write my first novel. It came out 30 years ago. It's called Some Great Thing. It's about a Black reporter working in Winnipeg, set in the Black community in Winnipeg, in the 1980s. And it's I thought the hardest thing I would ever do would be to write that novel. And I had been a reporter. My first job after university was to work as a newspaper reporter, first for the Globe and Mail and then for the Winnipeg Free Press. Sorry for the noise of the dog barking in the background. I knew Winnipeg very well, but actually the hardest thing to do wasn't to write the book, it was to get it published. It was turned down over and over and over again. I could wallpaper my bathroom with all the rejection slips I got for that first novel. And if you're writing about Black people or about Black themes, it's even harder, to find a publisher, especially back 30 years ago when I was first trying to publish and when you're completely unknown. And so it was very hard to find a publisher. And really, I think the single most important factor in becoming a successful writer is not your education, it's not how intelligent you are, it's not how much you know, it's how thick your skin is and how prepared you are to persevere and to keep at it and not give up, even when people tell you no. And honestly, that is the most important factor in developing as a writer, to not give up in the many years it takes to develop. So yes, it was very hard to publish that first book. I was turned down everywhere. And maybe 20 times I was turned down until finally I found a small publisher in Winnipeg named Turnstone Press. And years later, it was a national bestseller, but it took a long time to get there. And it was very painful, but you have to dig down and believe in yourself. And if you're doing something exciting in the arts, chances are you're going to meet people who dislike your work and who don't want to help you and who tell you your work is bad. And so it doesn't mean you should be arrogant or ignore people's advice. You should always learn, but you have to believe in yourself, and that belief is going to carry you through all the times when you're rejected, and you will be rejected.
Mm-hmm. I think, especially, 30 years ago, different climate. You were writing from a Black perspective, the Black lens, and having to, continue knowing your why, being passionate about it. I think, it's something that needs to be recognized, that, you have to keep persevering and be resilient, especially when writing from a Black lens. And I mean, you're one of our greats. You're a legacy in writing from that Black perspective and shedding light on a narrative that typically has not been told in a way that you do it. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. What was your favorite book to read when you were a kid? Perfect one to end on.
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. One is a simple, quick, easy, playful answer, which is true. And the other is a more serious and profound answer.
Mm-hmm.
When I was quite young, my favorite book to read was by Beverly Cleary. I used to pick up different versions of it every week at the Don Mills Public Library. I grew up in a part of Toronto called Don Mills in the early 1960s. And so I'd take my bicycle over to the Don Mills Public Library every week and pick up a new book about Henry Huggins and his dog Ribsy. And these were written by Beverly Cleary, who's one of the most famous writers for children's books in the world. She also wrote the Ramona series.
Yes.
And I just loved Henry Huggins and his dog Ribsy. And so that's when I was a little boy. When I started getting a little bit older, like 12, 13, 14, I started turning to all the adult literature on my parents' bookshelves. And I would say the book that like completely drew me in and made me worried and passionate and shook me up, and I really had to struggle through, was a very famous book, one of the most famous books written in the 20th century, called The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And I tucked into that book when I was 14, and it really shook me up. It's a very powerful, disturbing book exploring very serious issues of injustice and racism, and by a very famous American civil rights activist named Malcolm X, who was assassinated actually not long after that book was finished. And so he's one of the most important figures in the 20th century in terms of the civil rights movement in the world. And so I read his autobiography when I was 14, and it changed me forever. So I was reading adult literature by the time I was 14 or so. But even now, as an adult with children and hoping to have grandchildren one day soon, I still love to read children's literature. And many adults still love kids' literature, and many children are reading adult literature. And so we intersect in our reading interests.
Absolutely. I know the book that did it for me was The Invisible Man.
Oh yeah, Ralph Ellison.
Yeah,
I read that
Ralph
too.
Ellison.
Yeah.
Okay. No, we still have 3 minutes. I'm gonna get as much time from you as I can. Are you going to write more kids' books? Do you think?
I'd like to write a sequel, if I could, to Beatrice and Croc Harry. I left the door open, and the end of the book is quite open. I mean, I'm happy with the ending. I won't say what the ending is, but I left the door open to follow Beatrice on another adventure, and I'd like to send her right back into the Argelia forest with Croc Harry and the lemur named Killjoy, and I'd like to send her back for another adventure. So yes, I'd love to write a sequel, but I have to wait and see, if the publisher wants it. And I've never written a children's book before. So if this book does not sell, the publisher, might refuse to buy, a sequel. So I have to hope that the book sells well enough that I'm invited, to write a sequel. But I'd love to if the market gives me the opportunity to. And I also very much want to finish that book about the African-American soldiers who built the Alaska Highway in World War II. That book will be for adults.
Yes, I'm anticipating that one, eagerly anticipating that one. And I will tell you that I was speaking to some people who work in some school boards, and it's already on order to be in this book, to be in some school boards as well. So I think there won't be an issue selling your books, and hopefully there'll be a sequel.
Well, thank you. And hello to all. And hello to, I see that Carl Cadogan has sent a message in the chat, a very big and warm salutation to Carl.
Oh, yes. Hey, Carl. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think this is our time. It went really quickly. I want to thank you on behalf of everyone, watching right now. It's great to hear about this book. Got it here. My daughter and I will continue reading this book. It's an honor. So thank you for taking the time with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Colleen, and thank you all of the Ideas Exchange. I really enjoyed the visit, and I hope to make it back in person sometime to the Cambridge Library. I've been there before, and hopefully when the pandemic ends, I can come back again and meet some of you in person.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen, for being such a wonderful host. And thank you, Lawrence. Thank you to the audience for asking such fabulous questions. Be safe and healthy, everybody. And we hope to have you in our spaces, Lawrence, when this all is done and over with, all this COVID stuff. So
yes.
Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy all the snow we're going to get.
All right.